The sun hung low over Willow Creek Estates, the kind of Georgia neighborhood where every house looked the same. Every lawn was trimmed to regulation height, and peace was something the HOA liked to claim ownership of. Marcus Hill sat on his front porch that late afternoon, earbuds in, vape pen between his fingers, and the quiet rhythm of his day finally slowing down. His daughter's pink bike leaned against the porch rail, catching the last glint of sunlight. It was one of those rare still moments, a man taking a breath in his own home. After working hard for every piece of it, across the street, a figure appeared, brisk, stiff, and unmistakable. Karen Driscoll, HOA board secretary, walked her tiny dog like she was patrolling a border, sunglasses too large for her face, clipboard tucked beneath one arm, the kind of woman who measured her self-worth by the number of warnings she'd handed out. She slowed as she spotted Marcus, and even from a distance, he could sense the judgment radiating off her. She whispered something under her breath, then pulled out her phone. "Hi, yes," she said, voice sharp and official. "This is Karen from Lot 16. I'd like to report a violation in progress." "Yes," smoking on a common-facing porch. "It's right across from me again." Marcus looked up, removed one earbud, and caught her eyes. He didn't need to hear her words to know what she was doing. "Afternoon, Miss Karen," he said calmly. "It's Mrs. Driscoll," she corrected without missing a beat. "And it's after 5. Mr. Hill, HOA quiet hours are beginning soon. Also, vaping is considered smoking under Section 4, Article 2. Marcus blinked. "Quiet hours? I'm not exactly running a concert, ma'am. Just relaxing." Karen's tone carried that kind of fake politeness that was sharper than open hostility. "You know the rules. We're a smoke-free community." "On my porch," Marcus replied, keeping his voice level. "I'm not in the clubhouse or by the pool. This is my home." She scribbled something on her clipboard. "Rules apply equally to everyone," she said with a tight smile. "I'll make sure you receive the notice." As she turned away, Marcus leaned back, muttering to himself, "Yeah, I'm sure you will." He watched her walk down the street, tiny dog leading the way, her clipboard swinging like a badge of power. That night, the smell of collard greens and cornbread filled the Hill household. The clatter of silverware and laughter from the kitchen was the antidote to the day's nonsense. Nia Hill, Marcus's wife, was setting the table while their daughter Layla finished her homework. The house was small but warm, photos of family, graduations, cookouts, all lining the hallway. Marcus walked in, shaking his head. "You're not going to believe this," he said. Nia looked up with that knowing half smile. "Let me guess, HOA again." He exhaled through a laugh. "She caught me in the act," said. "Vaping's against the rules." "Wasn't that rule about cigarettes?" Nia said, incredulous. "She just made that up." Marcus shrugged. "I swear she looks for reasons. Last month it was my trash bin being visible. Before that, she said there was a lawn shade discrepancy." Nia paused. "What even is that?" "I asked her," Marcus said. "She told me my grass was a slightly different shade than the rest of the street." Nia laughed softly but shook her head. "They see you as a guest in your own home," she said finally, her tone fading to something heavier. Marcus leaned on the counter. "I worked hard to get this place same as anyone else here. I'm not gonna let someone like Karen make me feel like I don't belong." He turned toward the window. Across the street, Karen's house glowed with white light, her curtains slightly open. He could see her silhouette moving. "Watching, then let her watch," Nia said. "You just keep being you." At the table, their daughter looked up. "Daddy, what's HO?" Marcus paused. He glanced at Nia, then smiled at Layla. "It's a group that makes sure the neighborhood looks nice," he said slowly, "and sometimes forgets the people in it matter too." Dinner carried on with jokes and small talk, but that unease lingered under the surface. Later that night, Marcus stepped out on the porch again. The air was cool and quiet. He didn't vape this time. He just stood there, hands in pockets, looking out at the row of perfect lawns, wondering how something so neat could feel so unwelcoming. A car rolled by, headlights sweeping over him before slowing just enough to make a point. It was Karen again, pulling into her driveway. She glanced at him, phone in hand. He smiled faintly, giving a small wave. She didn't return it. The next morning, Marcus found a bright yellow envelope taped to his mailbox. In bold black letters, "Notice of HOA violation." He ripped it open and read aloud, "Violation, use of restricted smoking device in visible community space. Date, August 12th. Fine, $150. Action required within 7 days." "Unbelievable," he muttered at that moment. His neighbor, Mr. Lewis, a retired black veteran in his late 60s, walked by with his morning coffee. "They got you too, huh?" he said knowingly. Marcus blinked. "You've gotten one of these." "3, Lewis said. "First for my flagpole, then for my truck in the driveway." Apparently the American flag and Fords are visual clutter now. Marcus shook his head. "They really think they own this place." "Oh, they think they own us," Lewis replied. "That's the problem." He looked at Marcus, his eyes kind. "Don't let M scare you into silence. You belong here same as they do. Sometimes they just need reminding." That line stuck with Marcus. Later that day, as Marcus worked remotely from his home office, He could hear Karen outside talking to another neighbor, Ruth, a white woman in her 40s who usually kept to herself. "I had to call it in," Karen said in a whisper loud enough to carry. He was blowing smoke right into the open. "You know how it looks to new buyers." Ruth hesitated. "I mean, he wasn't hurting anybody, was he?" Karen gave a laugh. "That's not the point. Rules are rules. If we start letting people do whatever they want, the whole community slips." Marcus's jaw tightened. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop. They were practically on his lawn. That evening, Nia encouraged him to attend the next HOA meeting. "If you don't speak up, they'll keep walking all over you," she said. "I know," Marcus replied, "but it's not just about me. It's the principle. They don't even see what they're doing." Nia reached across the table and held his hand. "Then make them see." Friday evening, HOA clubhouse. Marcus walked in wearing a collared shirt, holding the fine notice in one hand and quiet determination in the other. The small conference room smelled like coffee and perfume. On one side sat Karen, along with HOA President Richard Lawson, a middle-aged man with a rehearsed smile, and Trevor, the young HOA treasurer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Hill," Richard said, overly polite, "glad you could join us. We'll address your concern quickly." Marcus took a seat. "I just came to understand how vaping on my porch violates any community rule." Karen slid a paper forward. Section 4, Article 2. The use of smoking devices in community-facing spaces. Marcus scanned the rule. "It says smoking devices producing harmful or offensive odors. My vape produces neither." Karen folded her arms. "The perception of smoking still sends the wrong message to children and visitors." Marcus stared at her. "The perception..." Richard cleared his throat. "We want to maintain a certain image, Mr. Hill." Marcus leaned forward. "Whose image are we talking about?" Silence hung for a moment. Trevor, the younger board member, looked uncomfortable. "Maybe this could have been a warning instead of a fine," he said softly. Karen shot him a look. "We can't make exceptions." "Exceptions," Marcus repeated. "You let the Hendersons grill every weekend, smoke rising halfway down the block." "That's different," Karen said quickly. "That's a community event." Marcus laughed under his breath. "Right." He stood. "I'm not paying this fine. I'll appeal it if I have to." Richard raised his hands, trying to sound diplomatic. "You're free to do that. But I'd advise you to remember, repeated noncompliance can affect your standing in the community." Marcus met his eyes. "I didn't move here to make friends. I moved here for peace. You are the ones disturbing it." He left the room, his heart pounding. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch again, not vaping this time, just staring at the quiet street. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken things. Then, a familiar voice called softly, "Evening, son." It was Mr. Lewis, standing by the sidewalk, a cup of tea in hand. "You did good tonight," he said. "Don't think they like being called out, but sometimes light hurts before it helps." Marcus smiled faintly. "Feels like I made it worse." Lewis shook his head. "Nah, you stirred the pot. Now we'll see who shows up when it starts boiling." They stood there in silence for a while. Fireflies blinked through the hedges. Somewhere down the street, music played faintly from someone's garage for the first time that week. Marcus didn't feel alone. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Ruth, the same neighbor who'd been listening to Karen, stopped by with a small plate of cookies. She looked nervous. "Hey, I just wanted to say I think what happened was wrong," she said. "You weren't doing anything bad. Karen makes everyone afraid of breaking a rule." Marcus smiled gently. "Thanks, that means a lot." Ruth nodded. "I think people are starting to notice. You're not the only one she's targeted." That gave him an idea. Maybe this wasn't just about defending himself. Maybe it was about helping others find their voice too. He looked out across the manicured lawns again. Same fences, same driveways, but suddenly, they didn't look as untouchable. They looked like something that could change. That evening, Marcus sat at his computer and started typing. The words came fast. Community petition for fair HOA practices. He wrote about selective enforcement, bias and dignity, in simple, respectful language. He printed copies, folded them neatly, and started slipping them into mailboxes one by one after sunset. At first, no one said much, but the next day, as he returned from work, a few neighbors waved at him, people who never used to. Some even whispered, "We got your letter." Karen noticed too. She stood by her mailbox, glaring as Marcus walked by. "Mr. Hill," she called out, "passing out materials without HOA approval violates section." He smiled calmly. "Good evening, Mrs. Driscoll," and kept walking. Her lips tightened. Marcus didn't look back this time. He just felt something shift, not in the air, but in himself. He didn't know it yet. But that small act, a few words on a page, a simple refusal to bow down, was the smoke that would start something much bigger. By the following week, Willow Creek Estates didn't feel as quiet as it used to. The same streets Marcus had once driven through with pride now seemed to hum with whispers. Curtains shifted when he walked past. Conversations cut off when he neared. The petition had done more than he expected. Some neighbors thanked him quietly. Others avoided eye contact. And a few, mostly Karen's friends, started to circle their wagons, muttering about troublemakers and people stirring things up. Marcus knew change never came without noise, but still, it stung. That Friday morning, as he backed his car out of the driveway, he noticed something taped to his garage door. Another bright yellow envelope. Notice of non-compliance, unauthorized distribution of materials. He shook his head, half laughing in disbelief. She's really not gonna quit, he muttered. Inside the envelope was a fine $200 this time, citing unapproved solicitation under community policy. Attached was a copy of the petition he'd delivered, circled in red ink. Unbelievable, he said again, louder this time when he came back inside. Naya was already up, sipping her coffee. Another one, she asked softly. He dropped the paper on the counter. For passing out a petition, she called it solicitation. Naya rubbed her forehead. She's trying to make you fold. I know, Marcus said, pacing, but I'm not giving her that satisfaction. I'll file an appeal again, this time, with evidence. He grabbed his phone and started scrolling through photos. Over the past few weeks, he'd quietly taken pictures of other neighbors' activities, kids selling lemonade, people handing out flyers for garage sales, church events posted on doors. None of them ever got fined. It wasn't just a double standard anymore. It was a pattern. Later that afternoon, as he printed out his appeal letter, his phone buzzed with a notification. Neighborhood app, new discussion, concerns about community image. Marcus clicked it. The post was anonymous, but the tone was familiar. Some residents have been bringing negative attention to Willow Creek by filing unnecessary complaints and stirring racial division. This is a family community, not a political platform. Below it were comments, some agreeing, others pushing back. People just need to follow the rules. This is what happens when you give everyone a voice. And then one that made Marcus stop cold. If they don't like the way this neighborhood is run, maybe they should move somewhere that fits them better. He stared at the screen for a long moment, anger rising, then forced himself to close the app. He knew replying wouldn't help, not yet. That evening, Mr. Lewis stopped by again, hat in hand, walking slow like he always did. Heard you got hit with another fine, he said. Yeah, Marcus said, handing him the letter. For handing out a petition. Lewis squinted at it. You're shaking a tree that's been growing crooked for years, son. Don't expect the branches to fall quiet. I'm not afraid of noise, Marcus replied. I just want to be treated the same. Lewis smiled, proud. That's the right fight, but don't fight it alone. He leaned in. There's a group of us have been watching all this. Folks tired of Karen and her little army running this place. We've been waiting for someone to stand up first. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You mean, like a neighborhood group? Call it whatever you want, Lewis said. Just know you ain't the only one who's had enough. 2 days later, Marcus opened his door to find 3 people standing outside. Mr. Lewis, Ruth from across the street, and Angela Matthews, a single mother of 2 who lived a few houses down. Angela spoke first. Mr. Hill, we wanted to talk. We've seen what's happening, and we're with you, she said. Karen's been targeting my kids for playing basketball too loud, she said. The sound disturbs the peace. But the Henderson boys play the same game every evening and she never says a thing. Ruth nodded. She'll find me for a flower bed once, said. The color clashed with community guidelines. I was scared to fight it until I saw you were. Marcus looked between them, humbled. I didn't think anyone even noticed. Oh, we noticed, Lewis said. We just needed someone brave enough to light the match. They sat on the porch together for nearly an hour, talking about every little rule, every quiet injustice that had piled up over the years. For the first time, Marcus realized this wasn't just his battle, it was everybody's. Before leaving, Angela said, we should come to the next HOA meeting. All of us, together. Marcus nodded. Yeah, let's make them listen. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the atmosphere was different. The small clubhouse was fuller than usual. Faces Marcus had never seen at these meetings before. Black, white, Latino people who usually stayed home now sat side by side, restless but ready. Karen sat stiffly at the board table, papers stacked in front of her like ammunition. Richard, the HOA president, wore his usual forced smile. All right, Richard began, tapping his pen. Let's get started. First order of business. Marcus stood up before he finished. Before we start, I'd like to address something, he said, holding a folder in his hand. Karen's eyes rolled. This isn't the proper time for it. Exactly the time, Marcus said, steady but firm. I have been fined twice in 2 weeks for actions that other residents regularly perform without consequence, and I can prove it. He opened the folder and began laying out photos on the table. Kids selling lemonade, flyers posted on doors, backyard BBQs with visible smoke. This, he said, pointing, is my next-door neighbor hosting a cookout. No violation. This is a church flyer on Karen's own mailbox. No violation. But me handing out a petition asking for fairness, that's solicitation. The room murmured. A few heads nodded. Karen stiffened. You're misinterpreting the rules, she said. Those are community events run by who? Marcus interrupted you. Her jaw clenched. Richard raised his hand, trying to calm the room. Let's not turn this into an argument. It already is, said Angela, standing up from the audience. He's right. We've all seen it. Different rules for different people. Ruth spoke next. I got fined for my flowers, but Mrs. Driscoll's got a whole fountain in her yard. Tell me how that's fair." Now the whispers turned into voices. The room grew louder. Richard looked nervous. Karen's face flushed red. "This is not how we conduct ourselves," Karen snapped. "You people," she stopped herself, realizing too late what she'd almost said. Marcus's eyes locked on hers. "You people," he said quietly. The silence that followed was heavy and sharp. Even Richard looked uncomfortable. "I think we've heard enough," Marcus said, collecting his photos. "This isn't about rules. It's about respect. And if this board can't treat every resident fairly, then maybe it's time we form one that can." He turned and started to walk out, but the room erupted, not in outrage, but in applause. Quiet at first, then stronger. One by one, neighbors stood. Karen sat frozen, her clipboard trembling slightly in her hands. That night, Marcus sat in his living room replaying everything in his head. Naya listened quietly as he spoke. "I didn't plan it to go that far," he said. "I just wanted to show them the truth." Naya smiled softly. "You did more than that. You gave people permission to speak." Outside, the air was humid, buzzing with crickets. Through the window, Marcus could see porch lights flicking on down the street, little beacons of calm after a storm. But calm wouldn't last long. The next morning, his phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from neighbors, some supportive, others not so much. One read, "You made this neighborhood look bad on purpose. Hope you're proud." Another, "About time someone spoke up. We've had enough to." Then came an email from the HOA board. Subject, "Formal notice of board review, Mr. Hill. Due to recent disruptions at the HOA meeting, your membership standing is under review. You may not attend future sessions until this matter is resolved." Marcus read it twice. "They're banning me," he said aloud. Nia frowned. "They're scared. That's all it is. You showed them their power has limits." Marcus sighed. "Yeah, but it's not over. They're gonna come harder now." And they did. Over the next few days, subtle things started happening. His trash bins were suddenly out of regulation position. A complaint came about his mailbox color not matching community tones. A code enforcement officer even showed up, citing a lawn maintenance violation. Marcus looked around his perfectly green yard, bewildered. "This is harassment," he said to Naya. "They're trying to bury me in paper until I give up." But instead of folding, Marcus doubled down. He documented everything: photos, dates, witness statements. He kept a folder titled Receipts. Word spread fast. Other neighbors, black, white, and otherwise, began emailing him their own stories. An older couple had been fined for a ramp they built for their disabled son. Another family for hosting a Juneteenth cookout. It wasn't just about one man vaping anymore. It was about a pattern of bias hiding behind bureaucracy. So Marcus did what any modern fighter would do. He posted the story online. He uploaded a short video, a simple, calm message recorded on his phone. Standing right on his porch. "My name's Marcus Hill. I live in Willow Creek Estates, and I've been fined twice by my HOA for things my neighbors do every day. This isn't about rules. It's about fairness. It's about belonging. We all deserve to feel at home in our own homes." The video went viral locally within hours. Neighbors began sharing it. People from nearby communities commented with support. Some even shared their own HOA horror stories. By nightfall, local news reporters were messaging him for interviews, and by morning, Karen's perfect little world had started to. The sun was barely up when Marcus received the notice. It wasn't an email this time, it was hand-delivered. A crisp white envelope slipped under his front door, marked mandatory board hearing. Inside, the letter read, "You are hereby requested to attend a special session of the Willow Creek HOA board to address your repeated violations, disruptive behavior, and the community unrest caused by your recent actions." Marcus folded the paper slowly. He wasn't surprised. If anything, he'd been waiting for it. "They're coming for you," Nia said from behind him. Voice calm but tight. "Then I guess it's time I stop defending myself," he said, setting his coffee down, "and start telling the truth in front of everyone." That week, flyers began to appear around the neighborhood. HOA Community Hearing Friday, 6 p.m. open attendance. Karen had pushed for the session to be public, thinking it would humiliate him. She didn't realize she'd just invited the entire neighborhood to watch her undo herself. By Thursday, word had spread beyond Willow Creek. Local reporters planned to attend. A small community news van even parked at the corner of Maple and Sycamore. The tension in the air was thick like a thunderstorm waiting to break. Friday evening came heavy and humid. The clubhouse parking lot was full. Cars lined both sides of the street. Families arrived in clusters, some curious, some angry, most quiet. Inside, the long wooden tables had been rearranged into a hearing format. The HOA board at the front, residents seated facing them. A microphone stood in the middle aisle. Karen sat at the head of the board table, her posture perfect, expression stiff. She wore her usual pearl necklace and a pale blue blazer. Composed, ready to restore order. Beside her sat Richard, looking uneasy, and the two other board members, one silent, one scrolling nervously through papers. When Marcus walked in, every head turned. He wore a simple white button-up and jeans. No folder, no notes, just quiet composure. He met eyes with Angela and Mr. Lewis, sitting in the second row. They nodded small, steady signals of support. Karen leaned toward her microphone. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "This hearing has been called to address multiple ongoing violations and incidents that have disturbed the peace of Willow Creek Estates." Her eyes flicked toward Marcus. "We believe in maintaining harmony," she continued, "but that harmony depends on residents respecting community rules." Marcus didn't flinch. He waited. Karen gestured to the printed papers in front of her. "Mr. Hill has repeatedly violated our vaping policy, distributed unapproved petitions, and engaged in behavior that has created division among neighbors." She smiled tightly. "Tonight, we hope to resolve this matter so we can move forward together." The room was silent. Then Marcus stood. "Can I respond?" he asked. Karen hesitated. "You'll have your turn." Richard leaned into his mic. "Let him speak," he said quietly. Karen frowned but nodded. "Fine, 5 minutes." Marcus stepped to the microphone in the aisle. He paused, scanning the room, not at Karen but at the faces watching him. People he'd passed every morning. People who'd waved once, then stopped. People who didn't know what to believe anymore. "I moved here 5 years ago," he began, voice calm but carrying. "I wanted what most of you wanted: peace, a safe neighborhood, a place to raise my family." He glanced briefly toward Naya, who smiled faintly from the back. "But over time, I started to notice something," he continued. "The rules didn't apply the same to everyone." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I took photos not to embarrass anyone, but to show a pattern." He held up the screen toward the crowd. Images of kids selling lemonade, flyers taped to mailboxes, smoke rising from backyard grills. "These are all from this neighborhood," he said. "Not one of these families received a fine, but when I vaped on my own porch quietly, respectfully, I got one. When I asked for fairness, I got another, and when I spoke up, I was called a troublemaker." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen's fingers tightened around her pen. "Those are isolated." "No," Marcus said evenly, turning toward her. "They're not. They're the same story, over and over. Maybe you don't see it, but people like me, we feel it." He took a breath. "This isn't about vaping. It's about belonging, about who's welcome here and who's just tolerated." Silence. Every eye stayed on him. "You say I divided the community," he continued, "but all I did was hold up a mirror. If that reflection makes us uncomfortable, maybe that's what we need to see." Then he looked directly at Karen. "You don't get to decide who belongs here. The law does, and fairness does, and fairness doesn't have a color." The room erupted in applause. It wasn't loud at first, just a few claps, but then more joined. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet. Karen slammed her gavel. "Order, order in this room." But the crowd didn't quiet right away. When it finally did, Richard spoke, his voice heavy with something that sounded like guilt. "Mr. Hill, you've made your point, and it's a fair one." Karen turned to him sharply. "Excuse me," Richard sighed. "Karen, we've received over 20 emails from residents about inconsistent enforcement. Some even included photos, the same ones he just showed." Karen's face paled. "You're not seriously suggesting—" "I'm suggesting," Richard interrupted, "that this board take responsibility for what's clearly become biased oversight." A murmur swept the room again. Angela stood up. "Then maybe it's time for new oversight." Mr. Lewis rose to— "One that listens." Ruth followed. "One that sees all of us." Dozens of hands lifted in agreement. Karen stood abruptly. "You can't just replace a sitting board." "Yes, we can," Richard said quietly, looking her dead in the eye. "If the majority votes to hold a recall." The audience stirred. People whispered, "Recall vote, tonight." Richard nodded. "If that's what this community wants, yes." Karen looked around, her control slipping, her face flushed. "This is absurd," she said, voice shaking. "You're all letting one man manipulate you." Marcus stayed silent. He didn't have to say a word. The people were speaking for him now. An hour later, after a long tense discussion and a Chauvin's vote, the decision was made. The Willow Creek HOA board would hold an emergency recall election effective immediately. Karen refused to look at anyone as she gathered her papers. As she stood, Marcus said softly, "You could have made this right. You know, all it took was fairness." She froze for a moment, eyes hard. "You think you won?" He shook his head. "No, I think we all did." She stormed out, the sound of her heels echoing through the room. The following week was like watching sunlight return after a long storm. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in months began waving again. Kids played basketball without fear of fines. And when the recall votes were counted, the results were decisive. Karen and her 2 allies were out. The new HOA board included a diverse mix of residents, Ruth, Angela, and even Mr. Lewis, elected by overwhelming support. At the first meeting under the new leadership, Marcus sat in the front row. Richard, now acting as an advisor, stepped up to the mic. "Tonight," he said, "we begin again. This community has learned something important, that rules don't build trust. People do." He turned toward Marcus. "And we owe that reminder to Mr. Hill." Applause filled the room. Marcus smiled humbly. "I didn't do it alone," he said. "You all stood up. You made the difference." Nia squeezed his hand. "You see," she whispered, "all that smoke turned into something real." Later that night, back home on his porch, Marcus lit a small candle. Not a vape, not a symbol of defiance, just light. The air was calm, the street quiet. Across the way, Angela waved goodnight. Mr. Lewis nodded from his porch swing. For the first time in months, Marcus felt what he'd wanted all along, peace. He looked up at the sky, whispering, "Guess it really was the smoke that started it all." Naya leaned against him. "Yeah," she said softly, "but it was the truth that changed everything."